Welcome to part 3 of creating a rose dapple gray. Here's your materials list. There's also links in the description below. Most of these you can find on Dick Blick or Amazon. Today we're going to be using Comart Burnt Sienna and Badger Black, and the airbrush is the Iwata HPC Plus. If you recall in part 2, we left our horse with just dapple gray over a base coat of bay. Now we want to add some shading, so I've mixed up mostly burnt sienna with just a drop of Badger Black. The way I add the Badger Black is I use a, what are those things called? A clay shaper. And make sure it's dry, and I put a drop of the Badger Black onto a palette to my right, and then I use the clay shaper and just tap it into the Badger Black and mix it right in the cup on my airbrush. I did add some golden extender, or retarder, I'm sorry, it works the same as extender, and a drop of water, and that helps to make the paint a little more translucent. I want to add shading over the white so it doesn't look so blue. You see how I'm adding some depth to the color over the haunches and over the stifles, down along the knees, and definitely across the top line. And it just adds another dimension of color to your shading. We want to work down into the lower legs, and although I am going to add a few socks to this guy, I want to bring the color all the way down to the hooves. I haven't really decided which feet I want to put the socks on yet, so some people like to mask ahead of time, but I like to bring the color all the way down, and that way if I want to do ermine spots or not put any white on at all or go a little darker, I'm not limited in my options by which legs have socks and which don't ahead of time. I can decide later. You can see how dark the mixture is when you paint it over the white on the lower legs. You can go thinner and keep it more brown, or you can even add a little bit more black if you want to go darker later, but I like to start with the lightest tone first and then add more black if I want to. That way you have options. Don't forget to shade the face too. Remember, as you're painting, to check the tip of your needle, because paint will accumulate on the tip, and if you don't clean it off periodically, you'll get a splat or a glob or something unpleasant. I'm working with about 40 pounds of pressure here. My paint is slightly on the thicker side. I don't want it too thin because, I do tend to work close and I don't want splats to happen. So let's add some shading to the tail now. You see there was some overspray at the top, but those reds are really pretty to leave mixed into the tail because a gray horse is going to have that has a red base coat like this guy. I'm working in fairly thin little streaks. My pressure is about 60 pounds here. I've added a little bit more of the retarder to make my paint a little bit thicker since I'm working so close. I'm probably less than 2 inches away from the model. The little thin streaks give it a nice illusion of hair. You can get that nice hair detail in just little thin lines. And see how the red shows through, how nice that is. Now I'm going to leave a lighter area in the center of the tail because that's where on a gray horse the tail tends to go lightest first at the tip. So you're going to have lighter hair in the middle of the tail all the way to the end. Same thing with the mane. I leave some lighter area in the front, and I will develop some more shading later on. I prefer to mix burnt sienna and black together because you get a richer color than burnt umber. I love burnt umber in certain circumstances, but it tends to have a little green tint to it. So if you have a horse that's too red, burnt umber is a great option to tone that down. But this guy is just, I really like the little hints of red showing through, like you can see on his neck here and on his hindquarters. In the very back of his stifles and on the insides of his hind legs, that red shows through, and it's just really pretty. You don't want to cover all that up, you want to leave some highlights. And notice I'm developing the shading on the muzzle. Now I'm going to go back in later and just add a little more darker black, but you can see there's a little bit of graininess happening here on the muzzle. And that's because I was getting some tip dry and causing some tiny flecks of paint to fly off the needle. You see that? So now I'm going to clean the needle tip, and the next layer this will blend out. So it's not a big deal, but when you see it start to happen, stop and clean your needle. I just use a damp cotton swab. Sometimes I'll dip it in a little bit of airbrush cleaner if my paint's really crusted on there, but typically just a little bit of water. I'll dip the Q-tip in and tap it off on a paper towel so it doesn't drip on whatever I'm working on, and then wipe it off. Let's see, isn't that better? Oh, I know, whoops. Well, a little bit blurry there, but we'll take a look in a second. And if it does get really bad, you can either wipe it off with your wet Q-tip, or you can just go back in with some white and paint over it, and go back in and do your shading again. Don't forget to darken the ear tips also. You know, a horse that is bay going gray is going to have the dark points, you know, on the lower legs and the ears. Looking pretty good so far. I'm going to add a little bit more shading into the bottoms of the ears. Leave a little bit of lighter at the top. That gives the ear more depth. Love how that top line looks. And see that little bit of red right next to the tail there? Isn't that neat? It always helps to have good reference photos when you're doing grays. I mean, they can come in so many varieties of shades and tones and colors and base coats. You know, any color of horse can turn gray. You can have a cremello that turns gray, which is really hard to tell because cremellos mostly are so light to begin with. Or you can have a black horse that turns gray. Duns turn gray, roans turn gray. Every color of horse can turn gray. I like to use a little piece of pantyhose stretched over the paint bottle as a paint strainer. Okay, now we have to decide which hooves are going to be light colored hooves. So it looks like we're going to go with the right hind. And the mixture of paint I used for this is burnt sienna, warm white, I just want to stop talking for a second so you can pay attention to what I'm doing here. anyways, I was saying it's burnt sienna, warm white, and a few drops of raw umber. That'll give you a nice peachy tone. Again, I always add the extender to this. The golden retarder actually is what it's called. And especially when you're working close, you want to add the retarder for two reasons. It'll keep your paint from spidering, which is what happens when you get too close, and you'll get like a round circle and then splatter marks that come out the sides, and it does look just like a spider. So for small detail work like on this guy, you need to do that, because whenever you're working up close, your paint's going to want to splatter if it's too thin. And plus, because I like to do the fine line work, I have to work at a higher pressure on the compressor. So like right here, I'm working at around 40-45 pounds. But as I do the more linear work, like when I do the main or when I do the striping on the hose, I'm going to be about 60 pounds. So I make sure I've got nice thin line capability, and that means retarder and Badger Black and about 60 pounds on the compressor. I know that sounds really high, but this paint's pretty thick. So you test it first before you go over to your horse. Again, you can always wipe it off if it doesn't work out, because you've put a lot of sealer on your horse before you started, right? And I'm just going back and forth gently. I'm about 2 inches, maybe 1.5 inches away from the horse's foot, and doing those horizontal lines that are the growth rings. I know they look kind of obvious at this point, but this is before there's been any shading put onto the hoof. Now we do the vertical lines. And don't worry if you go up over the cornet band, because you can go back in with a damp Q-tip and just gently wipe it off. Because you put lots of sealer on your horse before you did this, remember? Now I'm going to use this pink to paint where I'm going to use the white socks. And I know that sounds crazy to paint pink first, but white skin or white hair on a horse typically has pink skin underneath of it. So I go with the pink, and then later on I'll go back and hand paint the white over top of that, and the pink will just faintly show through, and it gives it a really nice realistic look. And see how I'm not painting all the way down to the top of the hoof, because when I hand paint later, I want to be able to make a few little ermine spots so that I can make striped hooves and make this really interesting. And see, painting this pink first will give the sock a nice shade to it instead of it being stark white. So that's why I like to paint the brown underneath of that too, because that mixes with that pink that you painted over it, and it gives that sock a different depth than you can get by just painting over white or masking off the white. And now I'm going back in with this is burnt sienna, or I'm sorry, burnt umber, and I'm going back in with a mix of that and the retarder and getting the line striping work done on the white hooves. White hooves aren't really white, and they're not really just yellow or brown. They have a lot of different tones to them. Don't forget to paint the bottoms too. Later on I'll go back in and add some hand painted detail to the bottoms of the hooves, and that'll be in another video where we detail this guy out with eyes and socks and hoof details and mane and tail details. And the final darkest shading that I'm putting into the legs. Up under the tail where the skin's dark, between the hind legs and the groin area. I'm just adding a few little wrinkles here. Adding just a little bit more depth to the shading. Here and there, some darker highlights or darker shading, I guess it would be. Not highlights, that's lighter, right? And I like to do a little bit of darkness around the eyes. Typically a horse that's bay is going to have black skin. Not typically, definitely. That's bay is going to have black skin, and so around his eyes is going to be darker where the hair is thinner. And it does give more depth to the eye. Then we'll go back in and hand paint the details of the eyes later with the pupils and the irises, and he'll probably have little eyelashes too, since he has such nice little eyelids. Well, thanks again for watching this part 3, and the next segment will be the hand detailing, so I look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks a lot, Mila Pierce from Half Fast Farm Studio.